The city's most exclusive restaurant, L'Étoile Filante, glittered under the Friday night sky. For one woman, it was a sanctuary of hope, a place to celebrate an anniversary and save a marriage she feared was slipping away. 7 months pregnant, she clutched a small gift-wrapped box, her heart full of memories. But just a few tables away, another woman wore a brand-new diamond necklace, a gift from the very same man. He was whispering promises to his mistress, completely unaware that his entire world, his billion-dollar empire, his reputation, and the life of his unborn child was about to shatter in the time it took to order a glass of champagne. This isn't just a story of infidelity. It's a story of how a woman's quiet pain can become a billionaire's public ruin. The weight of the Arlington name was heavier than the 7-carat diamond on Gemma Arlington's finger. It was a name synonymous with old money, ruthless acquisitions, and a veneer of philanthropic grace that glossed over the family's predatory business tactics. Tonight, however, she wasn't Mrs. Arlington, the elegant socialite who chaired charity galas. She was just Jen, a woman trying to anchor her drifting husband, Declan. She checked her reflection in the gilded mirror of their penthouse hallway. The midnight blue silk gown was custom-made, designed to celebrate, not conceal, the gentle swell of her pregnancy. At 7 months, she felt both powerful and fragile, a vessel for a new life that was meant to be the cement in the foundations of their marriage, their son, a Arlington heir. "You look breathtaking," Phoebe said from the doorway, her best friend's voice a mixture of admiration and concern. "Are you sure about this? He's been so distant." Gemma turned, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her tired eyes. "That's why tonight is important. It's our anniversary, Phoebes. Not the wedding one, the other one, the real one." She touched her stomach. "The 8th anniversary of our first date, right here at L'Étoile Filante. He can't have forgotten that. This is our place." Phoebe's silence was answer enough. Declan forgot everything that didn't have a dollar sign attached to it. He said he had a late-night merger meeting with the board from Singapore. Gemma continued more to convince herself than Phoebe. He was so apologetic. "But I'm going to go anyway. I'll order his favorite wine sit at our table, and when he's done, his assistant will tell him where I am. It's romantic, a surprise. Or a recipe for a lonely dinner," Phoebe muttered, earning a soft glare. Okay. I hope it's everything you want it to be. Just guard your heart, Jennen." Gemma picked up the small, heavy box from the mahogany table. Inside was a vintage Patek Philippe watch, one Declan had admired in a Geneva auction catalogue months ago. It was a piece of their history, a nod to a time when he looked at her with the same passion he now reserved for stock tickers. "He'll come," she whispered. Meanwhile, across town, Declan Arlington was fastening a necklace around a different woman's neck. The stones weren't diamonds of history and commitment, but of fire and immediacy, a spontaneous $1 million piece he'd bought that afternoon. "Declan, it's too much." Cassandra Reed gasped, though her hands were already tracing the intricate platinum setting. Her reflection in the mirror of her sleek, modern apartment, paid for by Declan, showed a woman in her late 20s, sharp, ambitious, with eyes that held none of Gemma's gentle weariness. She was dressed in a crimson dress that was a bold statement of intent. "Nothing is too much for you," Cassie Declan said, his voice a low murmur against her ear. He breathed in her perfume, a scent that was all sharp citrus and spice, a stark contrast to Gemma's soft floral signature. With Cassie, he wasn't a Arlington heir carrying the weight of a dynasty. He was just a man desired for who he wasn't what he represented. Or so he told himself. "But where are we going that deserves this?" she asked, turning to face him. You said it was a special night. I have a table at l'Étoile Filante, he said smoothly, ignoring the flicker of a memory, the ghost of a younger, more earnest version of himself, sitting at that very same restaurant with Gemma 8 years ago. He'd compartmentalized his life so effectively that the memory felt like it belonged to someone else. That was business. This was pleasure. The l'Étoile. I thought you could only get a table there if you booked months in advance or were literal royalty. He gave her a wolfish grin. I am Declan Arlington. That's better than royalty. He had in fact called his concierge and demanded they pull whatever strings necessary, leveraging his name and his colossal restaurant spending to secure a last-minute cancellation. A private corner booth, perfect for an intimate celebration. A celebration of what exactly? He hadn't defined it. It was a celebration of the feeling of being alive that Cassie gave him. As Declan's driver navigated the city traffic, Gemma's was pulling up to the restaurant's grand entrance. The doorman, a familiar face named Lewis, greeted her warmly. Mrs. Arlington. A pleasure. We have your usual table ready. Thank you, Lewis. I'm expecting my husband to join me a little later. A business meeting ran over. Of course, let me show you the way. The restaurant was a symphony of hushed elegance. Low lighting, the gentle clink of silverware on porcelain, the murmur of discreet conversations. It was a bubble of wealth and privilege, a world away from reality. Gemma was led to Table 7, a secluded alcove with a perfect view of the restaurant's famous starlit ceiling. Their table. She settled in the baby, giving a gentle kick as if in approval. She smiled a genuine, hopeful smile. She ordered a bottle of the 2005 Chateau Margaux, Declan's favorite, and asked the waiter to decant it. It would be breathing perfectly by the time he arrived. 30 minutes later, Declan and Cassie were led through the main dining room. The maître d'Antoine was the soul of discretion. He guided them not towards the main floor, but along a raised perimeter, towards a different private booth, one shielded by lush ferns and intricate woodwork. It was close to the alcove where Gemma was sitting, but offered the illusion of complete privacy. It's beautiful, Declan Cassie whispered, her eyes wide with a mix of genuine awe and the thrill of social climbing. Only the best, he said, taking her hand. He felt a surge of power, of control. He had it all. The perfect pregnant wife, at home securing his legacy. The exciting, passionate mistress here, stoking his ego. He had mastered the universe. Gemma swirled the deep red wine in her glass, its aroma filling her senses. She checked her phone. No messages. She felt a familiar prickle of disappointment, but pushed it down. Mergers were complicated. She understood. She picked up the menu, though she already knew what she would order for both of them. And then she heard it. A laugh. It wasn't the sound itself, but the timbre, a high, sharp burst of joy that cut through the restaurant's polite hum. It was a woman's laugh, but it was the man's response, a low, intimate chuckle that made the hairs on Gemma's arms stand up. It sounded like Declan. She told herself she was being foolish. There were hundreds of men in the city with a similar laugh. She was just lonely and on edge. She took a sip of water, her hand trembling slightly. She looked around the restaurant, her gaze sweeping past celebrating couples and serious-faced businessmen. Her eyes snagged on a flash of crimson in a booth she hadn't noticed before, partially obscured by a large fern. She saw the back of a man's head. The dark, perfectly coiffed hair was unmistakable. The set of his shoulders in the bespoke Tom Ford suit was as familiar to her as her own reflection. And seated across from him was a woman with fiery auburn hair, her head tilted back as she laughed again. Around her neck, a cascade of diamonds glittered, catching the low light and throwing it back like a starburst. a new necklace. Time seemed to warp, stretching and thinning until it snapped. The ambient noise of the restaurant faded into a dull, distant roar, like the sound of the ocean heard from inside a seashell. Gemma's world narrowed to that one table. Her husband, Declan. He wasn't in a late-night merger meeting with the Singapore board. He was here, in their restaurant, on their anniversary, with another woman. The blood drained from her face. The baby in her womb, sensing her distress, gave a sharp, painful kick, a sudden jolt that brought a gasp to her lips. She placed a hand on her stomach, a purely instinctual gesture of protection. Every happy memory of this place, every hopeful fantasy she had built for the evening, crumbled into dust, leaving behind a cold, hard shard of betrayal that lodged itself directly in her heart. He hadn't just forgotten. He had actively, cruelly replaced her. For a long moment, Gemma was frozen, a statue carved from ice and shock. Her mind reeled, trying to process the impossible tableau before her. Denial was the first wave to crash over her. It was a mistake, a look-alike, a cruel trick of the light. But the way he leaned forward, the intimate angle of his body towards the woman, the proprietary smile on his face as he watched her speak it, was all Declan. Every gesture, every nuance was a dagger. Her first instinct was primal to flee, to run from the restaurant, from the humiliation, from the truth, to curl up in her bed and let the world dissolve. But then a different feeling began to smolder in the pit of her stomach, a slow-burning rage that was foreign and terrifyingly powerful. It was the protective fury of a mother. This man hadn't just betrayed her, he had betrayed their child. He was toasting to a new love, while the vessel of his legacy sat just yards away alone. No, she would not run. She would not be the weeping, hysterical wife. She had given this man 8 years of her life, her loyalty, her body. She was Arlington now, and she would act like one. With a poise she didn't know she possessed, she gathered herself. Her movements were deliberate, almost unnaturally calm. She placed her napkin neatly on the table beside her untouched glass of wine. Then she stood up. The journey from her alcove to his booth felt like a mile-long walk across a field of broken glass. With each step, she felt the eyes of other diners on her, drawn to the silent, regal procession of the heavily pregnant woman in the midnight blue gown. She kept her chin high, her gaze locked on the back of her husband's head. Declan was in his element, regaling Cassie with a story of a corporate takeover, embellishing the details to make himself sound like a modern-day conqueror. He lifted his glass of scotch, the amber liquid catching the light. And that, he said with a smirk, is how you turn a rival into a subsidiary. Cassie was captivated. You're incredible. She breathed her hand, reaching across the table to cover his. It was at that precise moment that a shadow fell over them. It is an impressive story, a quiet voice said. Declan's head snapped up. The confident smirk on his face evaporated, replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. His blood ran cold. Standing before him, her hand resting protectively on her swollen belly, was Gemma. She looked like an avenging angel, her face pale, but her eyes burning with a cold, clear fire he had never seen before. "Gemma," he stammered, his voice a strangled whisper. He snatched his hand back from Cassie's as if he'd been burned. What are you doing here?" Cassie stared, her mouth slightly agape. She looked from Declan's horrified face to the pregnant woman standing over them. Confusion warred with indignation. Who was this, an ex-A business associate? Gemma's gaze didn't even flicker towards Cassie. Her eyes were locked on her husband, pinning him to his seat. "What am I doing here, Declan? I should ask you the same thing. I believe your merger meeting was at the office." did the Singapore board decide to relocate to our table, the sarcasm was delivered with surgical precision, each word a perfectly aimed scalpel. It's not what it looks like, he managed the classic pathetic refrain of the guilty man. Oh, I think it is exactly what it looks like, Gemma replied, her voice dangerously soft. She finally allowed her eyes to drift to Cassie, a slow, dismissive appraisal that took in the crimson dress, the ambitious glint in her eyes, and the gaudy necklace. She looked at Cassie not as a rival, but as an unfortunate, predictable cliché. "Declan, who is this?" Cassie demanded, her voice sharp. She was not a woman who liked being ignored or looked down upon. Declan opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His brain, usually so quick and decisive, was short-circuiting. His two worlds had just collided with the force of a particle accelerator, and he was at ground zero. Gemma answered for him. "I'm his wife," she said simply, the words landing with the finality of a judge's gavel. Cassie's face went white. Wife Declan had told her he was in a loveless, sexless marriage of convenience, a business arrangement. He'd said they were practically separated, living in different wings of the house. He had certainly never mentioned that his estranged wife was carrying his child. She stared at Gemma's belly and the entire fantasy she'd built of a future as the next Mrs. Arlington began to fissure. The air grew thick and suffocating. Nearby diners began to notice their conversations faltering. This was better than theatre. What happened next? Nobody expected. Gemma didn't scream or cry or throw a drink. She simply pulled over an empty chair from a nearby table, the legs scraping softly against the polished floor, and sat down at the head of their booth. She was calm, composed, and utterly terrifying. She looked at the waiter who was hovering nearby, with a deer-in-the-headlights expression. "I seem to have lost my appetite for the wine," she said, her voice even. "Could you please bring me a bottle of still water and a glass for my husband's guest?" She gave Cassie a thin, brittle smile. "You must be thirsty. It takes a lot of energy to climb." The insult was so elegantly delivered that it took Cassie a moment to even register the sting. Declan looked like he was about to have a coronary. "Gemma, please, let's not do this here. Let's go home and talk." "Go home," she laughed, a short, bitter sound, devoid of any humour. "You mean the home where our son's nursery is waiting for him? The home I have been managing while you've been merging." She leaned forward, the full force of her presence directed at him. "No, I think we'll do this, right here, in our restaurant, at our table, or at least near it." She turned her attention back to Cassie, her demeanour shifting from icy fury to a strange, almost clinical curiosity. "Tell me," she began, "what version of his life has he sold you? Am I the frigid, career-obsessed wife who doesn't understand him? Or perhaps the sickly, unstable one he stays with out of pity? He tends to rotate those two." Cassie was flustered, blindsided by the attack. He loves me," she stammered the word, sounding weak and hollow, even to her own ears. "Does he?" Gemma's eyebrow arched. "Did he love you this morning when he kissed my stomach and told his son he couldn't wait to meet him? Did he love you when he approved the designs for the new family wing at our summer estate in the Hamptons? You see, the problem with Declan is that his love is a commodity. He invests it where he thinks he'll get the highest return." She then did something that shattered Declan's composure completely. She reached into her clutch and pulled out the small, beautifully wrapped gift box. She slid it across the table until it stopped in front of his plate. "Happy anniversary, darling," she said, her voice dripping with poison. 8 years since our first date. Here. You forgot, but I didn't." Declan stared at the box as if it were a bomb. The public setting, the anniversary, the pregnancy, it was a perfect storm of his own making, and Gemma was now the conductor. He was no longer the master of the universe. He was a trapped animal, and his wife was the hunter who had just closed the cage door. The romantic dinner was over. The trial had just begun. The silence that followed Gemma's pronouncement was a physical entity. It pressed in on them heavy and absolute. The gift-wrapped box sat between the three of them like a judgment. Declan couldn't bring himself to touch it. To do so would be to admit everything, to validate the entire horrifying scene. Cassie stared at the box, then at Gemma's serene, implacable face. Anniversary. The word echoed in her mind. Declan had told her tonight was special, a celebration of them. He had lied. It wasn't about her at all. She was just a prop in his desecration of a memory. The $1 million necklace suddenly felt like a cheap trinket, a vulgar payment for services rendered. Humiliation, hot and sharp, coursed through her. She wasn't his future. She was his dirty little secret. I don't believe this, Cassie said, finding her voice, which was now laced with a tremor of fury. She turned on Declan. An anniversary. You brought me here on your anniversary with your pregnant wife, Cassie. Just listen. Declan started reaching for her, but she recoiled. Don't touch me, she hissed. Have you no shame? No decency. Gemma watched the exchange with a detached calm like a scientist, observing rats in a maze of her own design. Oh, he has no shame, she interjected smoothly. Shame is for people with a conscience. Declan has a balance sheet. Isn't that right, darling? Everything is a calculated risk. I imagine I was low-risk, stable returns, while she gestured dismissively at Cassie was your high-risk, volatile asset. The business terminology, their private language being used to describe his infidelity, was a new level of evisceration. It stripped the affair of any romance or passion he had ascribed to it and exposed it for what it was, a transaction. Declan finally broke. He slammed a fist on the table, making the silverware jump. Enough, Gemma. This is not the place. This is the perfect place, she retorted, her voice rising for the first time, not in a shout, but in a crescendo of controlled power. You chose to disrespect me, our marriage, and our unborn child in public. So you will be held accountable in public. I want her to see you for who you are. Not the charming billionaire, but a weak, deceitful man who hides behind his money. She stood up, her regal composure fully restored. The scene had served its purpose. She had not come for a screaming match. She had come to reclaim her power to detonate the bomb and walk away from the blast zone. Enjoy your meal, she said, her voice, once again a soft, chilling whisper. She looked directly at Cassie, a flicker of something that might have been pity in her eyes. And the necklace is lovely. I'm sure it will fetch a fair price. You'll probably need it. With that, she turned and walked away. She didn't look back. She navigated the tables with the same grace with which she had arrived, a queen abdicating a corrupt throne. As she passed the Mistress station, Antoine simply inclined his head, his professional mask hiding a deep respect. He had seen a lot in his years at l'Étoile Filante, but he had never seen a public humiliation executed with such devastating elegance. The moment Gemma was out of sight, the spell broke. Cassie pushed her chair back violently. I'm leaving. Cassie, wait. Declan said, grabbing her arm. Let go of me. She wrenched her arm free, her eyes blazing with tears of rage and shame. It's over, Declan. Whatever this was, it's over. You lied to me. About everything. She began to unclasp the diamond necklace, her fingers fumbling with the catch. Don't be ridiculous, just calm down and let's talk somewhere private. No. She finally got it undone and threw the necklace onto the table. It landed with a clatter next to the anniversary gift, a vulgar pile of diamonds next to a symbol of betrayed loyalty. She was right. I was a transaction. Keep your severance package. She stormed out of the restaurant, leaving Declan alone at the table, surrounded by the wreckage of his evening. The other diners were now openly staring, whispering behind their menus. He was the center of a scandal, the villain in a drama that was unfolding for their entertainment. He could feel their judgment, their pity, their morbid curiosity. Declan Arlington, master of the universe, was now just a common cheat who'd been caught. He stared at the two items on the table, the glittering necklace and the quiet, tasteful gift box. With trembling hands, he reached for the box. He tore off the paper and opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, was the Patek Philippe watch. Engraved on the back were the words, "For our family, for our future. All my love, G." A wave of nausea washed over him. It wasn't just an anniversary gift. It was a statement of faith, a belief in a future he had just incinerated. Gemma made it to the car before the facade cracked. The moment the door was closed, sealing her inside the soundproof bubble of the Rolls-Royce, the first sob tore from her throat. It was a ragged, guttural sound of pure agony. The calm, the control, the icy rage, it all melted away, leaving behind the raw, bleeding wound of betrayal. She curled in on herself, as much as her pregnant body would allow, her hands wrapped around her stomach, as if to shield her baby from his father's sins. The tears came in a torrent, hot and endless. She cried for the man she had fallen in love with 8 years ago, for the marriage she had fought so hard to preserve, and for the innocent child who would now be born into a broken home. Her phone buzzed. It was Phoebe. She answered, unable to speak, her sobs the only sound. "Jen, oh my God, Jen, what happened? Are you okay?" "He was there." Phoebes, she choked out between gasps. "He was there, with her. On our anniversary. She couldn't finish the sentence. "Where are you?" "I'm coming to get you." "No, I'm in the car. I'm coming to your place. I can't go home." "Not to that house. Of course. I'll be waiting. We'll figure this out, Jen. I promise. We'll figure this out." But as Gemma hung up, staring at the blurred city lights through her tear-filled eyes, she knew some things couldn't be figured out. They could only be survived. Declan, meanwhile, sat in the ruins of his date. He'd paid the bill in cash, an absurdly large amount, desperate to flee. He walked out into the cool night air, the watch box heavy in his pocket. He tried to call Cassie, but the call went straight to voicemail. He tried again. Voicemail. She had blocked him. He then tried to call Gemma. The phone rang once, twice, then was silenced. She wasn't sending him to voicemail. She was actively rejecting his call. The finality of it was more terrifying than any shouting match. He got into his own car and drove not home, but to his office. The Arlington Tower, a monument to his power and success, felt different tonight. It felt like a tomb. He went up to the penthouse floor, the city lights sprawling beneath him. He had always found this view invigorating, a symbol of his dominion. Tonight, it just made him feel small and utterly alone. He poured himself a large scotch and sank into his leather chair. The reality of his situation was beginning to dawn on him. This wasn't a simple affair that could be smoothed over with an apology and a new piece of jewelry. The public nature of the confrontation, Gemma's pregnancy, the sheer, calculated cruelty of his actions, it was a perfect storm. And he hadn't even begun to consider the biggest complication of all. Gemma wasn't just his wife, she was a Harrington. Her father, Robert Harrington, was a titan of industry, a ruthless old-school patriarch who had single-handedly built a global logistics empire. Robert hadn't just approved of Declan, he had propped him up. Harrington Logistics was the primary partner for all of Arlington Corp's international shipping. More than that, Robert Harrington personally held a 15% stake in Arlington Corp, a wedding gift to ensure his daughter's husband was well supported. He was a silent but immensely powerful member of the board. Declan's blood turned to ice. He hadn't just humiliated his wife. He had declared war on Robert Harrington. The fallout from this wouldn't be a messy divorce. It would be a corporate extinction event. His phone buzzed on the desk. The caller ID flashed a name that made his heart stop. Robert Harrington. He stared at it, his hand hovering over the phone, paralyzed by a fear he hadn't felt since he was a child. He had not only lost his wife, he had very likely just lost his empire. Declan let the call from Robert Harrington go to voicemail. It was an act of pure cowardice, and he knew it. A moment later, a text message appeared. It contained no words, just a single ominous summons. My office. 8 a.m. tomorrow. Don't be late. The lack of threats was more terrifying than any tirade. It was the calm, quiet command of a man who didn't need to raise his voice to be obeyed. Declan felt a cold dread seep into his bones. This was no longer a marital dispute. It was a hostile takeover of his life. He spent a sleepless night at his office, alternating between pacing the floor, drinking scotch, and rehearsing speeches that sounded pathetic and hollow even to himself. He tried calling Gemma again and again, but the calls were rejected every time. By dawn, he looked like a ghost of his former self, disheveled, red-eyed, and reeking of fear. Meanwhile, at Phoebe's apartment, Gemma had cried herself to exhaustion. Phoebe had tucked her into bed, fielding calls from a frantic Mrs. Arlington Sr., and of course from Gemma's father. "She's safe with me, Robert," Phoebe had said, keeping her voice low. "She's sleeping now. Just be there for her tomorrow." "I'll do more than that," Robert Harrington's voice had replied, cold as steel. "That boy has forgotten who his wife is. I'm about to remind him." When Gemma awoke, the sun was streaming through the window. For a blissful second, she forgot. Then the memory of the restaurant, of Declan's face, of the other woman, came rushing back, and the pain was as fresh and sharp as it had been hours before. But something had shifted in the night. The despair was still there, but it was now overlaid with a crystalline, diamond-hard resolve. She wasn't just a victim. She was a Harrington, and she was a mother. Phoebe came in with a cup of tea. "Your father called. He wants Declan in his office at 8. Gemma nodded, taking the cup. Her hands were steady. "Good. What are you going to do?" She took a slow sip, letting the warmth spread through her. "First, I'm calling my lawyer, the best divorce attorney in the country. Second, I'm calling my OB-GYN for an emergency checkup to make sure the stress hasn't harmed the baby. And third," she looked at Phoebe, her eyes clear and determined, "I'm going to my father's office. I won't be in the room. But I want to be there when Declan comes out. I want him to see me." At precisely 8 a.m., Declan walked into the Lion's Den. The offices of Harrington Logistics were the opposite of his own sleek, modern tower. They were old-world power, dark wood, thick carpets that absorbed all sound, and walls covered with oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors. Robert Harrington was waiting for him in his cavernous office, not behind his desk, but standing by the large window, overlooking the financial district, his back to the door. He was a tall, imposing man in his late 60s with a full head of silver hair and an aura of absolute authority. "Robert, why?" Declan began. "Sit," Robert said without turning around. It wasn't a request. Declan sat in one of the leather chairs facing the desk, feeling like a schoolboy called to the principal's office. Robert turned slowly, his face an unreadable mask of granite. "I received a call from my daughter at 2 o'clock this morning." She was hysterical. "Do you have any idea what extreme stress can do to a woman in her 3rd trimester? To my grandson, I am so sorry. It was a terrible mistake, a moment of, do not insult my intelligence by calling this a mistake." Robert cut him off, his voice dropping to a low growl. A mistake is a typo in a report. A mistake is taking the wrong turn on the highway. What you did was a calculated act of profound disrespect to my daughter, to my family, and to the sanctity of the vows you took. He walked to his desk and sat down, folding his hands. When I consented to your marriage with Gemma, I did so under the assumption that you were a man of character, that you understood what she was worth. Clearly, I was wrong. I overestimated you. Declan felt his throat tighten. I love Gemma. I can fix this. Robert actually laughed, a harsh, humorless bark. Love, you don't know the meaning of the word. You know about acquisitions, about leverage, about assets. You saw my daughter as your most valuable asset, the one that secured you an alliance with me. And you devalued her. In business, when an asset underperforms so spectacularly, we divest. The word hung in the air. Divest. The 15% of Arlington Corp that I hold, Robert continued, his voice dangerously calm, is held in a trust that stipulates it is contingent upon your continued good standing as Gemma's husband and the father of her child. My lawyers are currently reviewing the moral turpitude clause. I believe your very public philandering qualifies. Declan's world tilted on its axis. You would torpedo my company, your own investment. My investment was in my daughter's happiness, you arrogant fool. The money is irrelevant. You have failed to deliver a return. So I'm pulling my capital. I'm also instructing the board of Harrington Logistics to begin reviewing our partnership contracts with Arlington Corp. We will be exploring alternatives. This was it. The corporate death sentence. Losing the Harrington contracts would be a catastrophic blow, sending his company's stock into a nosedive. A public battle with Robert Harrington would make him radioactive to other investors. You can't, Declan whispered, the words catching in his throat. I can, Robert said, standing up. The meeting was over. You have 48 hours to get your affairs in order. I suggest you find a very good lawyer. Now get out of my office. You are no longer welcome in my building or in my family. Numb Declan staggered to his feet and walked out of the office. The long corridor seemed to stretch into infinity. As he reached the elevator bank, he saw her. Gemma was standing there talking quietly with Phoebe. She was dressed not in a morning gown, but in a crisp, cream-colored maternity pantsuit. She looked strong, professional, and completely in control. Their eyes met. In his, there was desperation, pleading regret. In hers, there was nothing, a complete and total absence of feeling. It was as if she were looking at a stranger, a piece of furniture, something so insignificant it barely registered. That look was more devastating than any tears or screams. It was the look of absolute erasure. He had ceased to exist for her. The elevator doors opened and he stumbled inside. As the door slid shut, the last thing he saw was his wife turning her back on him, a final, silent dismissal. But the day of reckoning was far from over. As Declan's car sped away, another was pulling up to the curb outside Cassie Reed's apartment building. Cassie, who had also had a sleepless night, was packing a suitcase. Her plan was to disappear to lick her wounds, maybe fly to Europe and try to forget the whole humiliating affair. Her buzzer rang. Thinking it might be a delivery, she answered it. "Who is it, a package for Cassandra Reed?" a polite female voice replied. Confused, Cassie buzzed her in. A few moments later, there was a knock on her door. She opened it to find a woman in a sharp business suit holding a sleek tablet. "Cassandra Reed?" the woman asked. "Yes. My name is Jessica Croft. I'm from the legal department at Harrington Logistics." Cassie's blood ran cold. I don't understand." "It's quite simple," Jessica said with a chilly smile. We were doing a standard background check on individuals associated with Declan Arlington, and your name came up. And a few interesting things came up with it. It seems the luxury apartment you're living in was paid for by a shell corporation. A shell corporation funded directly from a Arlington Corp discretionary account. An account meant for corporate travel and entertainment, not personal acquisitions. Jessica held up the tablet, showing a flowchart of money transfers. This is embezzlement and fraud, using corporate funds for personal gain without board approval. It's highly illegal. Cassie felt faint. That's between Declan and his company. It has nothing to do with me. On the contrary, Jessica replied, her smile tightening. You are the recipient of embezzled funds. That makes you an accessory. We've also found the car, the jewelry, the trips. It all came from the same account. Robert Harrington is prepared to press federal charges. The scandal would be enormous. Arlington Corp would collapse, and you, Ms. Reed, would be facing jail time. Cassie leaned against the doorframe, her legs threatening to give out. What? What do you want? An alternative? Jessica's voice was smooth as silk. You will sign a non-disclosure agreement, so airtight you won't be able to say the name Arlington or Harrington in your sleep. You will return every single item of value Declan Arlington ever gave you, including the funds for this apartment. And you will disappear. In return, Mr. Harrington will consider the matter closed and will not press charges. She slid a thick document from her briefcase. You have 1 hour to have your lawyer review this. I suggest you use the time wisely. Cassie stared at the document, her dream of a billionaire lifestyle turning into a nightmare of federal prison. She had thought she was playing a game of hearts. She now realized she had stumbled onto a battlefield, and she was nothing more than collateral damage in a war between titans. Her choice was no choice at all. The first blow landed not with a shout, but with the quiet, authoritative thud of the morning paper on his penthouse doorstep. Declan, who hadn't slept, saw the headline through the viewport of his tablet before he even touched the physical copy. It was the Wall Street Journal, and his name was at the center of a story that was about to unravel his universe. The headline was clinical, brutal, and perfectly crafted for maximum damage. Arlington Corp under scrutiny for misuse of corporate funds. CEO Declan Arlington implicated. His blood turned to ice. It wasn't about the affair. That would have been a tabloid scandal. This was an attack on his competence, his integrity, his very identity as a titan of industry. The article laid out with surgical precision the web of shell corporations and discretionary accounts. It detailed the flow of money with a clarity that could only have come from an inside source with access to everything. Robert Harrington's fingerprints were all over it. Declan's frantic calls to his PR chief went unanswered for a full 10 minutes, and when the man finally picked up, his voice was strained. We're in damage control, Declan, but this is a 5-alarm fire. The leak is too clean, too detailed. We're getting slaughtered. The second blow followed within the hour. As the market opened, a press release from Harrington, Logistics, hit the wire services. It was a masterpiece of corporate warfare, a single paragraph announcing the immediate termination of all partnership contracts with Arlington Corp, citing a fundamental loss of confidence in their corporate governance and leadership. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. He watched on the financial news network as the ticker for Arlington Corp BCP turned into a waterfall of red. The stock, his legacy, his birthright, was in a free fall. It plunged 60% in pre-market trading and only accelerated downward after the opening bell. His phone lit up with calls from panicked board members, but he knew they weren't calling for reassurance. They were gathering their forces for an execution. The emergency board meeting was convened for noon. When Declan walked into the boardroom on the 50th floor, the atmosphere was glacial. These were men he'd known his whole life, men who had played golf with his father. Today they looked at him as if he were a stranger, a liability that had to be neutralized. Their faces were masks of grim resolve. "Declan Ork," said Lawrence Shaw, the eldest board member, and his father's once closest friend, "this is a catastrophe. You've exposed this company to federal investigation and shareholder lawsuits. Your personal indiscretions have become a material threat to this entire organization. Lawrence, this is a targeted attack from Harrington." Declan pleaded, his voice sounding hollow in the cavernous room. "We can fight this. We can issue a statement." A statement, another board member scoffed. "Declan, your credibility is zero. The time for statements is over. The time for decisive action is now." The vote was a mere formality, a public ritual of his dethronement. The language was cold and legalistic, invoking clauses of moral turpitude and gross negligence. Within an hour of entering the room, Declan Arlington was no longer CEO, no longer chairman, and was forced to tender his immediate resignation from the board of the company that bore his name. He walked out of the boardroom in a daze, his security pass already deactivated. An assistant he barely recognized handed him a cardboard box containing the few personal items from his desk. As he walked through the bustling office floor, the place that had been his kingdom, a sudden silence fell. No one would meet his eye. They stared at their screens, at their papers, anywhere but at the fallen emperor, being escorted from his own palace. He retreated to the vast, empty penthouse. The silence there was heavier, more profound. It was the silence of failure. Days bled into a week, each one punctuated by another sterile, devastating email from his lawyers. Gemma had filed for divorce. Her petition was airtight, citing his very public infidelity. The prenuptial agreement, a document he had once boasted was ironclad, was now revealed to be a finely wrought cage of Harrington design. Its infidelity clause was merciless. "She gets the penthouse," Declan, his lawyer, explained over the phone, his voice devoid of sympathy. "She gets the Hamptons estate. She gets primary custody of the child, and you will pay a significant amount in support. Furthermore, she is entitled to a settlement that includes a large portion of your personal stock portfolio." The lawyer paused. "My advice, don't fight it. Robert Harrington is playing for keeps. He will bury you. Sign the papers. Salvage what little you have left." Amidst the legal carnage, another ghost from his past vanished. He received a small insured package containing a single key, the key to Cassie Reed's apartment. There was no note. His lawyer later confirmed that she had signed a formidable NDA and returned every gift of value. She had been a casualty, a piece swept from the board in a game she never knew she was playing. He felt a fleeting pang of something, not love, but a shared sense of ruin before his own self-pity consumed it. She had an escape route. He did not. 2 months later, in the quiet, sterile wing of a private hospital, Gemma held her son for the first time. As the baby, wrapped in a soft white blanket, was placed in her arms, a wave of love so profound and overwhelming washed over her that it cleansed the last traces of her old life's pain. He was perfect. He had her eyes and a stubborn tuft of dark hair. Looking at his tiny, innocent face, she knew with absolute certainty that her future was right here in her arms. "He needs a name," Phoebe whispered from her side, tears in her eyes. Gemma smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that reached deep into her soul. "Spencer," she said softly. "Spencer Harrington Arlington." She kept her husband's name for her son, for it was part of his story, but she placed her own family name before it, like a shield, a declaration of where his true strength, his true loyalty, and his true heritage would lie. Declan was a name on a document. Harrington was a legacy of survival and power. The divorce was finalized without fanfare. Gemma, now independently and immensely wealthy, moved with a quiet purpose that awed everyone around her. She didn't retreat into a life of leisure. Instead, she took a leading role at the Harrington Foundation, channeling her intellect and newfound resilience into philanthropic work. She wasn't just writing checks. She was on the ground, championing causes for single mothers and underprivileged children, her empathy forged in the fires of her own ordeal. She was no longer a beautiful accessory to a powerful man. She was power itself, redefined on her own terms. Declan, in contrast, learned to live with the constant low-grade humiliation of his new reality. He was still a rich man, but the currency he had truly valued, power, influence, respect, was gone. He operated a small private equity firm out of a nondescript office, his name a permanent stain that kept him out of the circles he once commanded. He became a ghost in the city that was once his playground, a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties. Almost a year to the day, after that night at l'Étoile Filante on a crisp autumn afternoon, Declan found himself walking aimlessly through Central Park. The air was cool, the leaves were turning, and the world felt peaceful in a way his own life was not. And then he saw her. Across a sun-dappled lawn, Gemma was pushing Spencer in a stroller, laughing at something Phoebe had said. She knelt down to adjust Spencer's blanket, her movements full of a tender, unhurried grace. He saw the curve of her smile, the easy joy in her posture, the vibrant life radiating from her and their son. It was a perfect, self-contained world of happiness, a world he had been invited to share and had carelessly burned to the ground. He stood frozen in the shade of an old oak tree, a spectator watching a life he was meant to be living. He was close enough to see the color of her coat, to see Spencer wave a tiny, chubby hand in the air. A desperate, foolish urge to call out to her, to explain, to beg rose in his throat, but it died before it could form a sound. Just then, Gemma looked up, her gaze sweeping across the field. For a single heart-stopping second, her eyes passed directly over him. He saw no flicker of recognition, no flash of anger, no hint of lingering pain. He saw nothing. It was the detached, indifferent glance one gives a stranger, a tree, a part of the scenery that holds no meaning. In that moment, he ceased to be her betrayer, her ex-husband, or the father of her child. He was simply an object in her field of vision, utterly irrelevant. He understood then the true nature of his punishment. It wasn't the loss of his company or his fortune. It was this complete and eternal erasure. He had made himself so small in her life that he had finally irrevocably disappeared, and he was left with nothing but the ashes of his empire and the ghost of a future he had so thoroughly destroyed. And so Declan Arlington's world, built on a foundation of lies, came crashing down. He learned the hard way that a business empire is no match for a woman's resolve, and that some debts can never be repaid with money. Gemma, on the other hand, emerged from the ashes, not as a victim, but as a victor. She transformed her pain into power, building a new life for herself and her son, proving that the greatest strength is not in holding on, but in knowing when to let go and rebuild stronger than before. This story is a powerful reminder that our choices have consequences that can ripple out and change everything. What did you think of Gemma's incredible strength? Was Declan's downfall justified? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who loves a story of justice and resilience. and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life dramas. Thank you for listening.